Hello, everyone. Are going to allow a few minutes for attendees to arrive. Hi, everyone. We're going to allow another minute for people to arrive. I would like to welcome you all to the second part of the series, Summer Tea with Curators, The Five Senses. This program is a 5-part series that explores the senses through the lens of the museum's collection. Today's speakers are Danielle Carrabino, the Curator of Painting and Sculpture, and Aprile Gallant, Associate Director of Curatorial Affairs and Senior Curator of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs. Before I hand this over to our panelists, I wanted to mention that following the presentation, there will be a Q&A. If you go to the next slide, I can show you the box that is located in the upper left of your screen. There it is. So it's right there, located up at the upper left. And I will now turn it over to Danielle.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So taste might be something that doesn't immediately come to mind when we look at art or enter a museum, but today we'll be dealing with a few works from our collection that engage this particular sense. So we're starting with this still life by Margaret Angelica Aprile from 1828. If we were in the museum right now, we would be on the 3rd floor in our 19th century American section. And that's actually one of the strengths of our collection. So I thought that would be an appropriate image or work to talk about today. I also selected this work because it features summer fruits, so fruits that are in season right now, and the fact that this is a work by a woman artist. The Aprile family was a huge family of artists, at least 10 of whom were active artists of some renown. And Margaret Angelica Aprile was the son of James Aprile, also an artist, who was her first teacher. However, I should mention that she also trained at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which actually was founded by her uncle, Charles Wilson Aprile. So there's a lot of Aprilles in the mix today. And there's an inscription on the back of this painting that I thought worth mentioning before I start talking about it, that indicates this was probably a gift to her sister, Anna Claypool Aprile. The inscription reads, Anna C. Aprile from Margaret Aprile, December 1828. And I mention that because these two sisters, both artists along with their sister Sarah, created several paintings with this subject, as did their cousins, uncles, and other members of the Aprile family. So this was a typical subject matter for the Aprile family, who really is credited with being kind of the first group of artists to usher in still life in American painting. There are at least 5 other compositions with watermelon, I should note. So this is one of a few, and they very much exchanged works among each other. This might be a copy by a work by her father, James. In any case, still life was a typical medium also for women artists who were not really allowed to study the male nude human form, which was, at this time at least, not deemed appropriate for a woman artist. So still life was something that they could practice. And as you see, it's, it seems kind of on the surface very just a few fruits and not much to it, but actually if you probe a little deeper into still life, there's a lot to talk about. So we'll get into some of those questions today. The first thing being that this is a highly arranged composition. So you have that wedge of watermelon with the seeds. I think the seeds have actually been a little manipulated by the artist so that they catch the light in a certain way, that there's a kind of variety to the angle of all the seeds. And then she has spilled them onto the ledge so that, again, they're highly arranged, as is the plate with peaches. Each of those peaches is very meticulously arranged so that you get a different view, a different angle of every part of that fruit. And then, of course, she's also arranged the leaves in the background to kind of frame this composition. Although the title doesn't indicate it, there's also a bunch of grapes to the left, which again is highly constructed as part of this image and kind of frames this work as well. So just to kind of be aware that this isn't just a kind of haphazard plate of fruit or arrangement of fruit. It's something that the artist has really taken care to compose and is very much a study in light and shape and form. We can also read this painting as a celebration of America's agricultural products, as a kind of source of pride. All of these fruits were considered to be very much American and enjoyed by all social classes at the time. So maybe one of the curiosities of this is that none of these fruits are actually native to the United States. The watermelon was actually introduced to the United States from African slave traders of Africans brought over. And peaches originated in China and came to the United States via Europe. So there's this kind of false sense that these are a celebration of the agricultural products of the United States, when actually none of these are native, and a lot of the cultivation of these fruits depended on immigrant workers, many of them workers of color. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. One of the curiosities I think about this painting is the watermelon, which we usually think of as red, having red flesh. In this case, it's a kind of pale yellow or white. And that might be a few possibilities, one of which being perhaps a pigment fading that a little more technical work on this painting would reveal. Could be that red is actually known to fade over time, so perhaps this was once a more red, kind of pinkish watermelon. I actually think it has more to do with the variety of the watermelon. There were several varieties of yellow watermelon, and I've been told they still exist today. This could be the Carolina long watermelon, it could be the White Wonder, all of which were known to have been developed and consumed in the 1800s when this work was created. So there's a few things that we can kind of, as I said, probe this image that might not be immediately accessible when you first look at it. But I'm actually more interested in thinking about this work in relation to the works that my colleague Aprile will talk about. And so I think with that, I will hand it over to her before we have a conversation about these works together. So back to you, Aprile.
Thanks, Danielle. I'm really happy to be here. And as Danielle said, I wish we were all in the museum, because there's nothing better than having people and art objects together and having a spirited discussion. But I appreciate the fact that you all came out today. I actually, listening to Danielle, I'm really struck by how the works really do have a lot of resonances. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the photography of an English photographer named Martin Parr. So Martin Parr was born in post-war England around 1952. So he was born and raised at a time of great economic prosperity, particularly for the white middle classes. And a lot of that shows up in his images. He was also born and raised during a time of the golden age of advertising and television. So this is sort of the air that he is breathing and where he develops his visual resonances. So Parr is known as a documentary photographer, and he's particularly interested in modern life and modern life as being reflected in social rituals, in sort of the little bits of everyday life that tell you so much about a people and what's important to them and how they live. And so a big part of his practice has been photographing food. So he started taking photographs of food around 1995, and it's a practice that is continued until this day. So we have a number of parts of images from Parr's food series, as he called it. And they really are they're interesting as individual photographs, but they're even more interesting in the aggregate, I think. They are very small. They're about 7 by 9 inches, and they tend to be framed very tightly so that you really have a very close-up view of food, and they're very intimate. They really draw you in. So he began taking these photographs when he got some new equipment. So he got a macro lens, which allowed him to really zoom in on an object, and then also a ring flash, which gives you this even sense of light, which I think you can really see in this picture, which is Untitled Frosted Cookie. And the other thing that strikes me about these is this is all, of course, pre-social media. I think we're all used to these days of going onto Instagram, and you always have that friend that takes a picture of every single thing that they eat. And it's beautifully arranged. And I think that this is a trope that we're now very familiar with, but this is prior to that Parr was really sort of honing in on food. And the type of food that he's interested in is very particular. He's really interested in what he considers comfort food and often junk food. He said that it's just naturally more interesting to him. And I think that there's a lot of interesting sociological ideas and celebration yet critique that is kind of embedded in these images. So let's pause and take a little look at this frosted cookie. One of the things that I loved that Danielle said was, talking about the light. And here, of course, you can see that it is brightly lit. It's got this silver foil background that really just glows, but the icing is, I don't know about you all, but I can almost taste this icing. It is so glossy. It's a little tacky. You can sort of smell it and also taste it in your mouth. The other thing that I find really interesting about this is that it does look like it's a haphazard snapshot, but these are very, very carefully arranged. Parr had a very long, career up to the point of taking these photographs. And so what I love about this one is that you've got the close-up of the central cookie, and then there are all of these, beautiful multicolored sprinkles that are sort of scattered about, but then you've actually got the corners of the other cookie, so it's almost like it's an abundance. It's an embarrassment of riches. All of these very sweet cookies just crammed in together. And you get this very, very close look at this tasty dessert. So, I think that, what I always note when I look at these is the use of color, always these very, very highly keyed colors. These are sea prints, and I believe that he actually, really twists the color up quite a bit because he wants this to be a mouth-watering experience. And then also, as I was saying, the texture. I love the fact that you can see that some of the sprinkles are kind of embedded in the frosting, and you really kind of get a sense of being in the presence of this cookie. One of the other things I think is really interesting about talking about taste in terms of art is taste is one of the few senses that is dependent on other senses to be really activated. And sight is definitely a big part of that. I think we've all had the experience of, when you were a child, putting a couple of drops of food coloring in your milk and having it taste very different, or biting into something, expecting one thing and getting another. So that I think sight has a big impact on taste. And then smell, of course. I think, you know, people who lose their sense of smell also lose their sense of taste. So taste is one of those things that's really embedded in with the five senses. So Parr, being an English person, started out by photographing English food. So if we could see the next slide, please. And this is one of my very favorite pictures. This is called mushy peas. And this is a very particular English food, and that he has taken this extreme close-up of. And mushy peas is actually not disgusting, but here it looks disgusting. I mean, it's almost like he really wants to push that boundary. He's got it very much in your face. And it looks gelatinous, and you know, you don't really have any other information about it, but it just does not look appetizing at all. I actually have a friend who's a food stylist, and she brought her children to the museum. Food stylists are people that set up those photographs in printed materials so that they look so gorgeous that you just have to buy what they're selling. But she brought her children to the museum. They saw this photograph, and from there on out, they refused to eat pea soup for a very, very long time. So it's sort of the power of images to kind of really evoke. It can really change what you experience when you taste things by having seen it. If I can have the next slide, please. So Parr also went from doing the very specific English food, although he considers this part of the British food series, to going much more broad, universal, and global. Although he identifies this as being British food, I think of this as being almost universal modern food. This very processed white bread, you can actually see the coating of butter on top of it, and then, you know, silhouetted on a white plate against this gingham tablecloth. I mean, it really also, I think, speaks of summer. But the other thing that he really evokes in these pictures of food is a sense of class. And that is also, I think, an interesting thing when we talk about the word taste, because taste does mean the sense, but it also is an indicator of preferences, as in my taste for X, or also class. She has bad taste, she has good taste. And, you know, one of the things that we know about highly processed foods is that they are affordable because they have a longer shelf life. And so I think Parr is really kind of playing with that idea, because as we know, the UK is very class conscious. It's got a very specific class system, and that is something that everybody knows and is a very big touchstone for a lot of English people. So I think that by doing these pictures of food, Parr is really shining a light on sociological elements of particularly English life, but then I think also more global. So, so that's all I have to say right now about Martin Parr, but I'm now going to turn it over to our colleague Tyga Ermansons, who is going to help us answer some of your questions.
Thank you, April. As April said, my name is Tyga, and I'm an associate educator at the museum. And I'm very happy to now share your observations and questions with Danielle and with April. And for the next about 10 minutes we have in the 30-minute program we've got scheduled. And I just want to let you know, if you have any thoughts afterwards, or if we don't get to your question, Lauren will be back to let you know how you can resend your question, and the curators will send you a reply by email. So first there are, Danielle, a few observations about the still life. And so a couple of observations first is interesting that the seeds seem to hover in front of the watermelon. And yes, yellow fleshed watermelon exists today. And then when I do this, the threesome here is that the other observation question is there any symbolism to watermelon, peaches, and grapes? As an aside, mushy peas are disgusting, but we'll get to that. So Danielle, if you can respond.
Sure. Yes. So there is mention in this painting of a watermelon maybe being a symbol of fertility, perhaps being connected directly to a woman artist, something full of seeds, something almost pregnant, if you will. And I'm not sure that this particular one has a kind of specific symbolism, but that has been mentioned in the literature on this painting. Peaches often tend to be, they have a kind of sensual connotation to them. And again, like April said, food is not just about taste, it's also about smell and sight, but also in Peach's case, tactility. You know, we've all kind of felt the fuzziness of peach skin. So there is this kind of perhaps allusion to sensuality and fertility. Grapes tend to often refer to the Eucharist. I'm not sure that in this context that is an accurate statement. That's certainly true of 17th century Dutch still life, from which American painters are often drawing from. But I think this is actually more, as I said, a study in composition. So I'm hesitant to push the symbolism too much, but that's as far as I know about what we can say about these fruits.
Thank you for that. And as far as like symbolism, to continue that, is that we have a question for April. Do you think that Martin Parr's white bread has deeper symbolism?
That's a really good question. I am not sure. I mean, I think it could. I mean, I do think that, you know, certainly something that is considered white bread is something that's considered dull and without character. But I should say that, you know, this particular vision of white bread seems to me to have a lot of character, and it's very much sort of placed front and center. And but I do think that, you know, Parr is definitely interested in issues of class, and he's interested in, you know, pushing those and investigating them, but in a very hands-off way. It's almost as if he presents these for us to see and consume visually, and the connections that we make between them are sort of up to us, which is why I love these pictures in the aggregate, is when they're hung together, you can start to make connections between them. And, you know, I particularly have, you know, loved the white bread image because it does seem to be sort of a universal symbol, I think, of sort of the lack of richness of you know, white bread culture.
So next question, to speak of like the issue of intentionality, perhaps by the artist, but why did Martin Parr want to make the mushy peas look unappetizing?
That's also a good question. And I don't know the answer to it. I mean, perhaps but that's also my interpretation, is that I think they look disgusting. I've actually had mushy peas and they're really not that bad. I think they look a lot worse than they actually taste. But he might have wanted to make them, you know, look alluring and delicious. But I think to American eyes in particular, they look terrible. But again, I think he really likes playing with that irony of doing something that's very close up. It's got a very intense hue. It's got a certain, you know, luscious texture to it, but at the same time, it's the that fine line between desire and rejection. You know, something that is considered, you know, disgusting but alluring at the same time. And that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about photography, is that these photographs, he makes them very jewel-like. And they're small and precious and they draw you in, but then they also push you back. And so I think he's really playing with that in a lot of his food series. And I have to say, that is not the most disgusting of the food series. Some of the ones that he has, we own one that is actually it's sort of a far off shot of a turkey carcass, and it's shot from a particular angle. And then there's a lamp right next to it that's the same color as the turkey. I actually don't eat meat, so I would be particularly turned off, but he seems to want to make that look as off-putting as possible. So I think a lot of it is in the eyes of the beholder, but at the same time, I think he really likes that. I think he likes playing with our emotions through images of food.
Now maybe perhaps a bit of a clarification. What is white bread culture, April?
Yeah. So I think that what I meant by that is, I think of white bread culture as being, modern culture, culture that doesn't have much substance, I guess. And I think it's a pejorative term used in a very dismissive way. So to call something, I think, white bread, I think we know that Wonder Bread does not have an awful lot of nutritional value. And so I think when someone talks about white bread culture, I think it's a pejorative term being used to say that there is not much substance to the culture.
And also now, April, if you know the answer to this, person would be curious as to when multicolored sprinkles date to, or when they were invented. They too seem very post-World War II item reference as a significance like reclass or kitsch, etc.
That's a very good question. I mean, I think, that's also true that processed foods really come into play, I think particularly in the 60s and 70s, and they are seen as this wonderful progress. And I think that Parr, it's hard to tell really where he stands on this. I mean, he does identify himself as a bit of a foodie, but at the same time, really clearly loves these processed foods and considers them comfort foods. But, I would suspect, I don't know the answer to that, honestly, but I would suspect that, multicolored sprinkles would be a product of, of the 50s, 60s, 50s or 60s, maybe even 70s, but I would think that they were earlier than that.
Thank you. So the next question goes back a bit to something Danielle spoke about the yellow watermelon. And so the question is, thinking about how red paint can fade over time, are there other colors that have a tendency to fade? And at the time, did artists know that some colors wouldn't last as long as others?
Yeah, so I'll answer the first part of that. Yes, there are other colors that definitely fade over time or change color. The one that comes immediately to mind is green because it has, I believe it has iron in it, and that can take on a kind of brownish hue when it oxidizes, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, colors since antiquity have been understood to fade. I'm not sure that the second part of that question is something I can answer. I'm not sure if this particular artist was aware of that. I think some contemporary artists play with that a little more and think about how art ages as part of the artwork. But at this time in the 19th century, I'm not sure that that was something that would have been deliberate. But yes, paintings tend to fade over time. And so that's something that conservation is constantly kind of trying to recapture so that we can see the original work of art as it was intended to be.
Thank you. And staying a little bit with the Peel painting to start, is that the question is that the frame crops out the grapes in the lower left corner, if everyone can see that. It's a bit dark perhaps. And so the question is, in the photograph though, other cookies go outside the four sides, right? Can the two curators talk about framing as an artistic device in general, and then specifically for the two distinct mediums?
Yeah, I love that question. I think there's definitely something that goes back again to this idea of arranging that both April and I talked about, the kind of composition that these artists are getting at. In the case of the Peel, the grapes aren't even mentioned in the title that probably we've given it, maybe after the artist, but it's the focus really is the two, the watermelon and the peaches. And I feel like that dark bunch of grapes is a framing device. I feel like it's deliberately cropped. I don't think that that's, actually I don't think anything in this painting is haphazard. I think all of it is extremely carefully calculated and is part, as the person who asked the question insinuates, is part of this framing device, which I'm curious to let April respond to, because painting and the arrangement of fruit for a painted medium is a little different than photography. So I'll hand that over to her.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. So as we know, photographers are not creating they're not creating the image itself, but they are taking something that they see and they are structuring it to make us see certain things. So I appreciate the fact that this framing is very, very intentional. And I think, as I mentioned, I think that it's kind of connected to this idea of abundance, so that you can see sections of these cookies, and so that they're probably like a large plate of cookies, and it kind of gives you that sense that there's more to be seen here, and that's very, very intentional. So, but of course, he's also trying to make a balanced and pleasing composition. So you've got, the two fragments of cookies that are kind of on a diagonal. So it sort of like leads your eye almost like off the image. And but also he really wants us to see this. Someone mentioned that that it's a foil doily, which also has kind of shades of classism in the fact that some people might think that is quote unquote tacky. So so I think he is trying to draw our attention to different parts of the image by how he surrounds the central cookie. So obviously the framing is very different from the painting, where the works are arranged in a very specific way. And here Parr is actually just focusing on the points of quote unquote reality that he actually wants us to see, and doing that in a way that sort of leads us in a very specific direction.
Thank you. Maybe again, to follow up that is that there's an observation question about the other factors of color and lighting that might impact how we perceive the actual taste of the food. And April, you had said before too about how sight plays such an important part in this. And so in the person asked, for example, the cookie tastes salty to me, although the frosting and sprinkles taste very, very sweet. So is color and lighting playing into that, perception?
Oh, I would say absolutely. I mean, because as much as framing, lighting is a huge part of this. I was talking about how, the kind of oiliness and pastiness of the frosting really does, at least in my mouth, it produces a very sweet taste. But then also you've got that contrasting with the very brittle, the brittleness of the cookie, which is getting less of the lighting. So I think certainly he's trying to lead us in certain directions, and doing that not only through the framing, but also, as you point out, with the lighting, highlighting very specific areas. And I think that's what this ring flash does, is that it gives you this very even lighting, but of course different sections of the food is going to, catch that light very differently.
And actually, this will have to be our last question observation. And it speaks to, like, at first glance, these pieces are really different. And so there's the question about, though, how there's a similarity in how they're arranged, a dark background. The sprinkles are like falling, are like the falling seeds. And so there's a thought about, are they following any similar traditions? But let me just follow that up with two, is I see a bit connected, this other observation question. The dark margin along the lower border of the peel still life seems to blur the boundary between the pictorial and the viewer's space, as though the seeds on the table are creeping towards that boundary, figuratively creeping. And if you think this is experimental, so as far as similarities, as far as composition, the seeds, the sprinkles, and then this pictorial space. I'm sorry to lump that into one, but let's see how you can do with that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really rich observation. And I'm glad that it was understood that they do have similarities, because at first glance, it looks like these are totally disparate images. So I'll just speak to the painting. Yes, the ledge is, it's a bit of a motif in Western art. We could go back to Roman art at this point, with the idea that painting is a reflection of our world, and those boundaries are often blurred. And painters love to play with this idea because it shows off their skill. So I think absolutely Margaret Angelica Peel is placing that ledge as both a boundary, but also a kind of foil. Are the seeds spilling into our space? Could we just reach out and grab one of those peaches? It's a testament to the way that she's painting that draws on a very long tradition of still life painting in Western art.
Yeah, and similarly, I would say that Martin Parr is clearly aware of the very long history of still life painting. I mean, one could hardly not be. And certainly, I think he's trying to show abundance and a sense of, prosperity through his food pictures. But I think he's also very deeply influenced by advertising and media culture, because that's what these pictures really call up for me, in their very saturated colors and in this very sort of close-up, even lighting, sort of the richness and the immediacy of the way that we read these, which I think we read photographs much more sort of readily and quickly than we do paintings. But certainly he must be aware of the very long tradition of still life painting and what that means. And so I think he's, affected by both of them. But I also love having these two together, because looking at the sprinkles and then looking at the seeds, I never saw that before. And that's really one of the great joys, I think, of us being able to do this, is to bring two different perspectives, bring things from the collection that probably would never hang together otherwise, and be able to get such great questions from all of you.
I think now we'll turn to Lauren. Thank you all.
And I wanted to also thank you all for attending today's program, and for Danielle and April on their insight. If we didn't get to your question, I invite you to email the SCMA members email, which is located on your screen. And we hope you can join us for our next part of the series, Smell, on Thursday, August 6th. The link for this program will be sent to your email tomorrow, or you can also find it on our website. We hope to see you next time.